to the Wisdom Check by Tabletop to Keyboard. This is going to be our bi-weekly podcast where we discuss things such as Dungeons and Dragons. Actually, I think maybe we need to turn up my mic a little bit, guys. How about some more game?
More game. This is the Wisdom Check. This is the intro to end all intros. Talk about Dungeons, Dragons, and
Now, I don't think that's proper. This is a family show after all. This is the intro we can use, fellas. It's good, clean fun for everyone. Welcome to the Wisdom Check, where we have wholesome conversations about the dilemmas we face every day.
Nah, hold on a second. I got your intro right here. Yeah, that's better. Welcome to the Wisdom Check. Well, I'm right, Jeff's wrong. We're going to have guests on to talk about it. It's going to be awesome, because I said so.
He is right. He did say so. I don't know. Is surf music the best music for a podcast about D&D?
Fuck yeah.
Okay.
This just in, nobody can agree on our intro for this podcast. So we're just going to start. Welcome to the Wisdom Check. Roll for initiative. Fuck. A 1. It's like every time.
All right. Welcome, everybody. It's another Monday night here. We are live on the Wisdom Check. I am Dustin. With me always over there is Jeff. And situated there in the seat of honor today is Daniel D. Fox, the creative director for Zweihander RPG. Go ahead and say hi to everyone, Daniel.
Everybody. It's going to be a good one, folks. And just to get something here, we had something crazy happen in the intro of all things. Fruitzilla just bombed us with an incredible cheer. Thank you so much, buddy. We're going to get right on making emoji specific for you. I think there will be some kind of Fruit Godzilla amalgamation coming. So we'll figure it out. But thank you so much. That was crazy cool.
That is awesome. Thank you, Fruit. Okay, so while we're in the middle of talking about some, let's get a little housekeeping out of the way here to start off. Another mega cheer from him. Hold on.
Whoa!
Thank you again, Fruit. So if we get going here, we do have a little housekeeping off the top. Just to keep all of our viewers up to date. Of course, this is Monday. This is Wisdom Check. On Thursday at 9 p.m. Central Time, my Zweihander game, Terror and Treefall, will begin for session number 1. Hope everyone enjoyed character creation. One of the reasons I wanted to do it this week was because I knew I had Daniel coming on, and this was going to be a great time. We get to talk a lot about Zweihander and get all hyped up and ready for it. We also have a couple of giveaways coming up real soon. The people at Found Familiar Coffee are going to sponsor a giveaway for some D&D themed coffee that you'll be able to get soon from us here. You'll find some details on that if you sub for the next month. They're going to be on the show, and the night that they're on, we're going to pick a winner from the subs. So go ahead and make sure you sub us so that you're eligible to win some free D&D themed coffee. And I also have here with me, because it came in this week and I wanted to show it off a little bit. I have here, this is from the company Looped LA Jewelry out of Los Angeles, and it is D&D themed jewelry. This is from voice actor Tara Jade Sands, who does the voice of Bulbasaur and Pokemon, plus some Digimon and a lot of other voice acting talents that she's done over time, and she donated that to us to do a giveaway as well. So I'm going to work up on how we're going to do that giveaway. So just a little housekeeping off the top, things for our viewers to be able to look forward to in the month to come. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started here with Daniel. So thank you, Daniel, for being on the show tonight.
Yeah,
there's Fruitzilla with all the tier 1 gift subs. There he is, just raining them down.
Going crazy. Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. For the coffee. Yes. Man, we're never going to get through this intro. Thank you, buddy. Jeez.
So yeah, we do appreciate you being here. We were talking a little bit before the show that we do like to kind of give our viewers a little bit of a background on your gaming experience. So tell us a little bit how you got started in tabletop role playing.
Yeah, so first off, Dustin and Jeff, thank you for having me here. Obviously, for Zill and everybody else in the chat, thanks for joining. I aged myself for a second, so I'm 42. So a lot of people in our 40s or 30s, or perhaps even 20s, I started my gaming experience with D&D. Around 12 or so, I'm going to say. And it was with Keep of the Borderlands. That's where we started. And we had no idea how to play it or what to do. But, a couple years later, we figured out how game mechanics work. And from there, it was a match made in heaven, so to speak. I played D&D for years and years and years, up until I discovered Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, probably about 9 or 10 years ago. I had played... Yeah. Of Dungeons and Dragons until I started writing an RPG, and D&D kind of went.
So can you tell us what happened in the D&D game that made you so mad you decided to make your own game? I mean, something had to have gone down, right? Like,
there was a severe incident.
We know we've seen the picture of you with the shirt that says "Apparently I hate D&D." So I mean, you gotta there has to be a story behind it, all right?
Question. I get this a lot. And there was this history, there's a story. So I think, or whatever they do, a lot of people house rule because there's something they're dissatisfied about the rule system, something they just want to change about the game. And I think this is kind of born from my own ignorance of the broader RPG world. I was never a game store role-playing gamer. I really went to conventions. In fact, I hadn't been to any conventions until 2018 Gen Con's my first convention ever.
All the ones to go to.
Yeah, I know, right? But my buddies and I were always like, we're basement gamers. So we didn't really know anything about the broader world of RPGs. D&D was our thing. To make D&D work for the kind of world I ran, kind of low dark fantasy, low magic. Obviously, D&D is not the right system for that in hindsight. Absolutely. But I kept trying to change it. I was like, okay, well, if I change this rule here, to change that rule there, maybe it'll work out. And I have a deep abiding love for Dungeons and Dragons. Don't get me wrong, but over time, I just kind of I think it's after 4th edition came out of Dungeons and Dragons, I was just like, okay, I need to find something else. I need to figure out like what else is out there. I need to explore beyond, kind of my comfort zone. So I made my first trek to a gaming store, where this world I didn't know, I mean, literally the people I gamed with, the people I grew up with, in middle school and high school, most of us had stayed here in Kansas City, and we were all just basement gamers. So I went to Tabletop Gaming Hobby out in Overland Park, Kansas. Mm-hmm. Or a man named Phil. He introduced me to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1st and 2nd edition. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this system is amazing. Game world. I hate the old world because it just wasn't. It didn't quite match what I had intended for my own game. Mm-hmm. And from there, it kind of down this path for about a year and a half, trying to fiddle with until I figured out maybe I can just make my own thing, and that's where that was the catalyst, I guess you could say, for creating Zweihander. Was just my general dissatisfaction for as a rule system, and then Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay for the old world. So I started reconstructing from the, so to speak, I suppose, where Zweihander started as
yeah. I've noticed that, Danny, we're losing a little of your audio. I don't know if you need to move your mic just a little closer, maybe. I thought it was just me, but I noticed Crazy Ike's saying too that he's losing a little bit. So
a couple words here and there going away, but we got the gist of it.
We got the story though.
It's pretty interesting because I've definitely found myself at times wanting to do a lower magic, kind of more Game of Thrones kind of level, fantasy world where there are fantasy elements, but there's more grittiness to it, more texture that you can kind of get into and explore some of the complications that come from severity of injuries and dynamics in fighting and that kind of stuff. And some of that, I guess, is the World of Darkness influence for me.
That's what I maybe rightfully or wrongfully, when I tell people about Zweihander, I'm like, it really feels like World of Darkness to me at first, only not in a modern setting. And in some ways, even more brutal than the World of Darkness, because you're not some supernatural creature that can survive it.
Sure, yeah.
Right. Yeah, my experience of World of Darkness was fleeting. I certainly, spent some time trying to understand that world. But I think we were just, my gaming group and I were always just kind of steeped in, for good or for ill, I suppose. And even though, I consider myself a pretty voracious reader of Robert Howard and Lovecraft, I never really played in those RPGs. I never played Conan the Barbarian, the RPG. I never played Call of Cthulhu. So fantasy milieu kind of was where we found ourselves, and where Zweihander kind of started. You all hear me clearly now? Am I getting out?
I think it's better. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going well. Yeah. So it's interesting because that's definitely the feel I got, was more of a a feeling of Warhammer for the start of things, but definitely felt that Conan and a little bit of the Cthulhu kind of vibe to it. I'm not sure what it is exactly is doing that, but I guess the darkness of the hostility of the world, maybe that indifference that seemed kind of to creep out of the the setting a little bit, from just the little bits I've seen. Maybe that's just, I'm biased on a couple things I've looked at, but
I think it's pretty astute. I think that of those games in particular is that, so Dungeons and Dragons plays toward high fantasy. It does have fantasy very well. You're the big damn hero. That's what you do, right? You're built from the ground up to be able to conquer the world. With Howard and Lovecraft and the RPGs that spun off of that, a more indifferent approach. The stories are clearly rooted in reality, and I think that's really where I wouldn't call myself a dark fantasy fan. I don't know if low fantasy. I don't know how you categorize a genre, honestly. But the thing that always appealed to me in my gaming group, which is the big driver for Zweihander, was really about telling where the fantasy isn't painted in broad strokes. They're painted with thin brush strokes, but many thin brush strokes over time will be a broad stroke, will be a beautiful oil painting, as an example. So the way I kind of created Zweihander, the way I layer my own campaign, is I start the fantasy out really with very kind of slivers here and there, almost breadcrumbs, until things begin to open up. And I think that's why word and how those things influence the development of Zweihander over time, where that issue may be between all of that feel of human stories, that the world is indifferent, that you're not, that your character is probably not going to change the world is going to change the character. That you're not it's not, whereas in D&D it's you go out and you change the world and you're 20th level and you do all this big damn awesome shit that's fun. But for lower fantasy games, it's not really about 0 to hero, it's about 0 to 1. It's about how the world changes your character, and Zweihander certainly takes that approach. It's one of the design, I guess one of the design philosophies, if I was to yeah.
What sort of systems have you used to kind of guide that kind of concept? Because a lot of times when you're getting into game design, I tinker around here and there, pretending like I could do this stuff. But you take this high concept, this philosophy, and then you try to come up with structures that actually drive content that direction. So did you find any that specifically leads towards this storytelling mechanic of shaping a character based on your story, or is that left to the GM to kind of cultivate on their own?
It's a good question. I think because in to step back for a moment, to talk about math, okay? Because math, at the end of the day, RPGs are about math. Sometimes they're very simple problems or simple formulas. Sometimes they're very complex formulas. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we're calculating probability. And if I'm to kind of put on my right brain approach, which is like, what is the best mathematical formula for game design? I think that there are a couple of concepts that resonate well with me. The first being bounded accuracy, where low level, high level aren't disconnected, meaning as opposed to focusing on layering on more and more numbers, instead, I'm to say you're not layering on more numbers, but you're adding more options. So the options you get at low level are really no different than options at high level, except in small ways. But time perspective, to embrace the idea of bounded accuracy is to ensure that you don't have, say, for example, sweet spot in old school D&D. In my mind, AD&D second edition, the sweet spot's 5th to 7th level. When you get to 12th level and above, it gets a little funky. It becomes hard to balance. And I knew that that's one thing I wanted to sweep away. I wanted a game of Zweihander to feel like a 5th to 7th level characters in Zweihander. So that's how I began to shape the game mechanics. And I knew that even though I loved the D20 system, during its heyday, the growth of the D20 system for practically every game, I guess it's been the late 2000s, I knew I didn't want to use the D20 either. Maybe it just felt kind of like this artifact, I suppose, of like the things I disliked about D&D. And I wanted more variance and the
more granularity in the dice. Yeah.
And not necessarily to say that there needs to be, like calculate degrees of success and then conjugate narratively. Instead, I wanted to say there are basically 4 states. The states are pass, critically fail, and critically succeed. And then the game master within that variance of 4 results would say, okay, here's how I narrate that. So I wanted to keep things simple because I'm a big believer from a product design perspective, a big believer in meaning what can I design that's small enough and compact enough to fulfill the needs of the audience, the needs of the game master, and then layer on from there, layer on complexity, layer on all the different things you could do. So gravitated toward the D100. One, because it was something that I absolutely adored about the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay system, based in their 3rd edition system, although it was a cool, not great in play. But I knew that the D100 system felt, because I could have that granularity. And even though at the end of the day, math is math, a D20 is really no different than D100. The D100, you get far more variance. You always would know your chance for success.
Right. Yeah, it's baked in. You're already being told the odds. Yeah,
that's right. And if you played D&D like I did when I was younger, like I never told anybody the armor class. I never told anybody what number they needed to hit. It was always a guessing game, and that felt a bit antagonistic. Because I think that, another thing that really bothered me about D&D, and this is where I go on about apparently hating D&D.
We get it out of him.
Let your hate flow.
Right. Yeah. I love the game, but there are some magic is fashioned that does promote an antagonistic style of play. A good example of this I can draw from, of course, and I always DM'd, so I should. Right? Like I was always the DM, and I was a quote killer DM because I'd use the same tactics that players would use against me. So as an example, teleport in, they blast fireballs and teleport out. That was the go-to. Like if you wanted to just like once you knew where the enemy was, if they hadn't blocked their walls with metal against clairvoyance, like you could see where they're at in your crystal ball. Let blast fireballs teleport out. So I would use the same thing against my players, and they hated it. And it created these systems where we're constantly vying back and forth. And I think that some of my players are actually in chat now and can nod their heads about this. Really antagonistic relationship. And I just a kid, and then you get older and like time, and maybe this isn't the right system. So wrong system in general, but perhaps it was the wrong system for me. So I decided to adopt the D100 system and really strip back a lot of the finickiness in Magic in particular. A fighting hatred of Magic systems, and Zweihander has one. If I had my druthers, we'd have no Magic in Zweihander at all. I don't run my games with Magic on player side generally, anyhow. But that's a whole other back open.
It radically changes the stories that you could tell.
It very well can, yeah.
Yeah, and the structure of how a story can unfold really changes. Because I mean, if you have a game where you're low levels and you have a mountain you have to climb, you get these skill challenges, you have the environment as something to deal with. As soon as you have spells in there, fly, levitate, teleport. Oh, okay, that's not a thing anymore. Oh, you got diseases? Cool. No, you don't. Cleric's got a level 2 spell handy. So I could see that. I mean, I love using Magic. I'm playing a wizard now. So like in games with Magic, I like to use it. Just more or less though, because I like the toolkit. I like the many options, and be able to come to a challenge and using my intelligence to kind of figure out what I need to do. So like the more options I have as a player, the happier I am. But I do find that when your tools end up being rocket launchers and sledgehammers, it's hard to have subtlety in a story. And I think that's maybe what you're getting at.
I think you really keyed in on something there that resonates really strongly with me, which is the idea of options. So if we take the traditional, your Magic using classes have the most, again, you get the most options out the gate. You could do so many different things that other characters can. I'm not necessarily talking about from a mathematical or whatever it may be, but just talking options. Options are important not only just for Magic using classes, but also non-Magic using classes. And that's something that one of the other design principles of Zweihander I worked in, the combat system, was that different things that all players can do, regardless whether they use Magic or not. Because everyone should feel that they can do more than simply move, strike, dodge. Like, to me, that kind of war of attrition is, in a lot of RPGs, kind of veer into that semi-tactical territory. There certainly does as well, even though it is a kind of weird hybrid of like full game with weird narrative elements. But I love the idea of options, and I think that the things that I love about D&D, and this is where kind of it's a bit of a paradox, I suppose, is like, as much as I hate the Magic system of D&D, I love the idea or the principle of options, and being able to have those options for and that really kind of worked, it, I guess, wormed its way into some degree in Zweihander when I sat down and said, okay, about combat, how can I make it as compelling as flex spells and layering those spells together? And that became the foundation of that kind of tactical element of Zweihander's system.
Yes, yeah, I've always liked the concept of having like stances or positional attacks or subtle complexity, I guess, like simple systems, but they interact in complex ways. So you have these emergent gameplay opportunities. Like I always like that, but there are also players that like the concept of just, I walk in and I hit it. What happens next? I hit it. What do I have? I have one move. I am good at it. That's what I do. I would be bored to death, but other people love that stuff.
Jeff unfortunately didn't get to play in our one shot that Matt ran for us when we did Chateau. So he didn't get to experience the combat system, but you get a pool of AP and you get to choose how you're going to spend that AP every turn. So you got this action economy that's really flexible in how you use it every round. So it does help make the combat more, you feel like you have more options. You can go for the heavy swings and you can do the perilous stunts, and you can do these things that are, maybe you don't even have those kind of options in other games as just someone who's even just a fighter type class. So it's kind of, you do have a lot of option like on what you want to do. So it is nice. I like the way that it plays.
Now, is that meant to kind of emulate like a stamina, or is that just more of just kind of an abstract concept?
think that it's a somewhat of an abstract system, obviously, but I think that a comparative system. Actually, if I was to say like how combat is in Zweihander, what it's most like, if you've ever played Tactics Ogre or Final Fantasy Tactics, it uses a very that I like that tactical style of gameplay. Or things that didn't quite belong, at least in the concept of how I thought combat would work in Zweihander. So I took the most essential elements, which is about like options and layering, and allowing not only just players who are within a specific archetype or profession to do that, but to allow all players to do that. Meaning, you can be a wizard with a sword. You can be a fighter who throws dirt in people's faces. You can be, an abbot or a laborer and still be useful in combat, not necessarily having to rely on like the fighter with the big sword, even though the game does support that style of play, because it's important to support those styles of play regardless of what our abilities may be toward gaming. Because like you said, sometimes I just want to lead in and with a big weapon and just like deal some heavy damage. But there's also times in the game, because it is tactically based, that people are going to be heavily armored, and you need to outsmart them. And the way that you do those things in Zweihander is through perilous stunts. So as an example, in an early, I think it was our first alpha, internal alpha, we had a character named Chauncey Redding, and he was heavily armored. He's wearing full plate armor, and he had this huge damn Zweihander sword, and it was the middle of this rainstorm, and you couldn't penetrate his armor. It just couldn't happen. So this is what kind of led to where, like, well, how would you narratively take that character down? And one of the other players was like, well, what if we try to choke him out? Like, what if we took him off his feet? And I was like, aha,
grappling.
There we go. That's right. So I was like, well, grappling, that makes sense, but how do you do it in a simple way? Because grappling is an uber complicated mechanic when it shouldn't be. So we stripped it down to its most essential elements and applied what we kind of call gameplay approaches. So what does it mean? So if we were to frame it from the perspective, like, what does it mean for Chauncey Redding to hit somebody with a sword? He makes a martial melee attack. What happens then? The player either chooses to parry or dodge or takes damage. Perfect. So what does it mean to grapple? Make a simple melee attack. The opposing player has an opportunity to resist with athletics. If they fail, they're choked. So very, very simple application that uses very simple approaches that are fluid across all different types of actions. So you didn't feel like if you chose like one type of perilous stunt that it would feel drastically different in how you conjugate the math than other options. So I felt that was a good approach, and it seems to work. People seem to like it. I would say that it's by far what took us the longest to really kind of work through in Zweihander was the combat system, to make it feel fair and dangerous and feel right. But I think it really kind of goes back to that fundamental principle that I like about D&D Wizards, which is options. I want to be able to choose more options and layer those things intelligently together through an action point combat system that allows me to, I'm going to charge forward, I'm going to throw dirt in their eyes so they can't dodge or parry, then I'm going to swing my weapon. Or I'm going to sweep them off their feet, I'm going to drop down and then hold them in a chokehold. Basically give them different ways that aren't just necessarily about chipping away at hit points. And although Zweihander doesn't use hit points as an example, and this is another thing it does like about D&D, but
I knew we were going to get that one at some point, but yeah, go on.
but really, yeah. So like, I think Lucius and chat's actually about a dodge, parry, deflect, disarm, knock them down. Like, you get all these different things that you can do, and it's not just one class, not just one type of character who can do it. It's all characters, and because each of those abilities hinge off of a different skill, because Zweihander is a skill-based system. You have a more broadly applicable and useful character in combat, even though some characters are certainly built for combat. Everyone has something they could do, and they don't feel useless. You don't feel like, well, I'm a level 1 wizard, and I just fired my own my only magic missile, so I guess I go sleep so I can get my spells back. Right. Instead, it says, like, hey, I'm a stevedore, I'm a laborer, like on a dock. Like, what the hell am I going to do in combat? Like, from a narrative perspective, well, you're going to have a bevy of options that you can use. And you don't feel useless next to, say, the sellsword, who is just a combat monster. They can ignore injuries in some cases. So I think it really, to return to what you spoke about wizards, like you have options. You can make intelligent choices using the action point system to make tactical approaches to make combat interesting and flexible.
And you have to gamble a little bit, because if move is 1 AP,
that's right.
A perilous stunt's 1 AP, and your attack is 1 AP, you've left nothing to parry or dodge with because it's active defenses to a degree. Unless you're really heavy armored, you got active defenses. So you have to wager, like, is it worth going for it, or do I want to have one in the hole here to ready to parry with? So like you gotta think about your options a lot. Like you have to weigh the pros and cons of your actions in combat, and that really comes in when you start taking damage. Because as you said, there's only health levels. There's not a lot of them. And injuries are, that's the end of your character sometimes, depending on how you roll. Like, it can be bad. Like, you have to really debate if you even want to go into combat to begin with.
Yeah, it's and to step through that too. So, Zweihander, it's not, characters don't have a high, they don't have a higher propensity for death. They have higher propensity for lasting injury, for permanent injury. And in the system, it kind of pulls the wool over people's eyes, I think, because they think that they're stepping in. They're like, oh shit, like I'm gonna die. Like my character's gonna die. But it because there are fate points to escape death, and you earn those over time through gameplay. There are ways out of death, and more often than not, what we find in our own games is that characters suffer more injuries and more disorders than really facing that death. In fact, I think it's probably been, at least 4 years since we've had a true character death, like dead character. And we've been running Zweihander for, 7 years now, I think. And like I mentioned before, I'm a killer DM, so I'm not pulling any punches. But I'm giving, but the system essentially allows you that opportunity to save yourself. Back to kind of what Dustin had mentioned about health levels. Zweihander, of course, it doesn't use hit points. Hit points is a fantastic approach, but it's not the right approach for Zweihander. So we had like a wound system up front where you manage like numbers, and I was like, I don't want people to manage numbers around the table. I just want them to tick a box and move on. So you have thresholds, damage thresholds, and each threshold has a specific name. So you may be unharmed, you may be lightly, moderately, seriously, grievously wounded, or slain. And there's different levels, and those levels, you can actually be knocked down multiple levels with one hit, depending on how much damage you take, because the thresholds increase over time. And of course, the further down the condition track you go, the more likely it is for you to suffer a lasting injury. And those injuries have to be treated. They have to be mended. They have to be taken care of, because there are, I want to say that there are 42 unique injuries in the game, I want to say. And they're all different, and they're all lasting. And, in fact, this game we've been running now for 50 sessions for Queen of Embers. There's a new campaign I've been writing. We're 50 sessions in, and in the first 12 sessions, our first 12 game sessions, so three months, a person was suffering from a severed ear, because it takes time to heal. But we also wanted to ensure that injuries wouldn't necessarily just completely gut the usability of characters around the table. So while your injury is mending, you're still able to get up and around and move and do things. In the case of the severed ear, he just had to flip the results on percentile dice to fail all awareness tests to hear. So each of these injuries certainly can grow worse. They take a while to heal. And it kind of shows that, at least in the way that the system works, that there are things that are far worse than death, because death is an easy way out. Like, your character dies, cool, roll up a new one. But instead, we're saying growth through adversity. We want to see character growth through and I think combat is a really good example of that. Even though combat is, quote, the last choice you make in a game like Zweihander, you will rely on other skills before you rely on combat, because combat is like a pendulum, will swing back and forth. the combat,
man.
Sorry, we do want to cut you
Wow.
off, but we got another $50 donation from Fruitzilla, and a whole bunch of more subs come running in. So he's got to go to bed. So we want to thank Fruitzilla again for all the support again tonight. And we love you, Fruit, and never
59
change, buddy.
subs.
Never change.
Yeah, keep this train rolling. We love you, man. We will find ways to make this worth your while. Good grief.
Yeah,
That's fantastic.
So just to help cover like some of the cool systems that this game has that you don't really see in other things, like you're talking about avoiding combat. You have an entire social almost combat system with social intrigue and the way that it can work. Like, and it's designated. It's kind of structured, like where the players can pick which kind of skill they want to use going into it. And as a GM, you pick like for the NPC, like he has like immunities to some and he's susceptible to others. And so if they pick the right ones, they get more benefit and not. Like, it's a really cool system just for that part. So if you do avoid combat, you still have these other cool things. It's not just one roll and like this whole thing's done. Like, there's still other ways you can get engaged. So why don't you cover your thoughts on how you came about with a social sort of system? Like, you don't see that a lot in games.
Yeah, and thanks for mentioning that. Social intrigue is a kind of the bugbear in the room, I think, with a lot of RPGs, is that either they do them really well or they do them very poorly, or they're so abstract it's hard to wrap your head around. As much as I love Burning Wheel, the system is like really confusing to me, so I'm not really sure how to play it. Same thing with Dungeon World. It's a really cool
and like that too.
Yeah, exactly. They're really intriguing systems. I just don't know how to play them, and I wanted to make these more grounded in the skill-based system. So, like as an example, like you go to a market, you're gonna bargain over the cost of a honeypot you need to make bandages. You roll a skill test, you succeed, you successfully bargain. Very straightforward. That exists in Zweihander, but there are times where clearly more complex intrigues happen, and a good example of this is the Game of Thrones RPG. So Game of Thrones RPG says, pick your tactic, roll tests, whittle away at their mental threshold, and eventually defeat them. Cool. But that doesn't feel right either, because that kind of veers into the territory about what if I role play really well? What if I say something really clever? What if I'm not a great role player, but I want to explain what I'm doing? So I felt the best approach there for social intrigue was to say, okay, so players will choose basically a tactic or a skill. They'll say how they want to interact, basically their general disposition in the social intrigue. They'll roll a test, and the results of that test will generate basically keywords for me as a game master to lean on. So as the intrigue begins, I have all these keywords on a piece of paper, and then we jump into the role play. And even though they may have failed or succeeded the skill test, it doesn't necessarily imply that they will succeed or fail the intrigue. What they're more or less doing with those skill tests is revealing keywords for me to lean on as a game master to figure out how I'm going to role play the non-player, how I'm going to role play the character they're interacting with.
Now, can you give us a specific on that? Or are you talking like, I don't know, more? I'm blanking on words all of a sudden. I want to bring this up, but different adjectives that may be coloring their response to you. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, so that's exactly right. So let's say if they fail a intimidate test, and based on the general disposition of the NPC toward them, the NPC will adopt one of 7 adjectives. They may be fearful, they may be mistrusting, they may be disbelieving. Essentially, those skill tests result in adjectives that I write down on a piece of paper as a game master. And as I role play with the players around the table, I keep these things in mind, and I don't call for more skill tests. We just have a conversation like you would normally role play around a table, and the results of those tests do not guarantee success or failure. It just simply drives the narrative, and that's where Zweihander begins to kind of veer into that weird kind of hybrid territory of like it's no longer a exceptions-based skill game. It's a narrative game in some sense with the game master tools. And social intrigue is just one of those many tools that kind of stay as a standard, but into and basically plays Zweihander that's not necessarily just about combat. Another good example of that is our chase scene mechanics. So we have, like it's as an example, like it's always really hard to adjudicate chase scenes. I feel
they're tough to make work, right?
Because movement is usually very abstract compared to any of your actual stats. So,
and you're lacking the visual components that make a chase scene interesting.
And Zweihander kind of veers toward more narrative territory for that as well. And it's a love it or hate it system. Some people love the chase system because it's very, very simple in approach, and it uses the same skill-based stuff from before, where you're basically adding up numbers and facing complications at times. But it allows you as a game master to have another kind of tool in your box to say, okay, well, what happens if the enemy runs away? Like we've had situations where we went from social intrigue to combat to chase scenes, within the same game session, and it's very, very fluid because it's meant to be able to be moved very easily between those narrative subsystems. So, chase scenes are obviously that, and then wilderness travel is probably, I think, one of the stronger suits of the GM tools that you can use to drive narrative overland travel, basically a way to emulate Lord of the Rings and make it interesting as opposed to rolling every day for random encounters. Right. Make it more narrative based. Every person in the party has a role they fulfill. One person is a scout, or many people are scouts. One person is the survivalist. They're tending to the baggage train, the supplies, things of that nature. One person or many people are the guide. They kind of see to the overall travel, and as each stretch of the of the journey happens, you make a series of skill tests to see how people survive. And that is, I feel, we use a lot of wilderness travel when we just recently opened up our Queen of Embers game. I keep going back to that because that's kind of what we're playing right now, and it's most relevant to what I'm kind of doing. But we just kind of left the city, so to speak. We played like 27 sessions in a city, and now we're in the wilderness.
Ready for a break, yeah.
That's right. So we're kind of moving between places, and there's a system built for that, so you can make those situations intriguing, fun, awesome, and you still get to roll dice, because at the end of the day, no matter whether you're playing combat or social intrigue or chases, whatever it may be, you want to roll dice and succeed at doing those things and have fun. And I think that by making a hybrid system that uses dice rolls in an interesting way that still kind of is based in that foundation of bounded accuracy, that there are ways you can make those things fun for players around the tables as opposed to simply narrating, okay, day 2, mark off rations, make a random encounter check, and the old Gygaxian hex crawl to reach back to D&D.
You get a little Oregon Trail action in there, right? Yeah. The wagon axle breaks crossing the river, sort of thing. Like,
well, it's interesting because these are things that we tend to actually cut out of our games for these reasons that they're
hand wave and snap and you're there, right? Because no one really wants to always deal with it. But if you have a better system for it, people might actually deal with it more.
Well, I think it's an important aspect. I mean, you need to understand why groups of people don't just travel. You need to understand distances in the game. Like, those need to be real challenges. And so in some way they have to be on camera. But like you were saying there a second ago, you say people like to roll dice. I don't know if it's necessarily that people like to roll dice. Maybe they do. But I think it's that people like to have some kind of complication, a challenge, something that is something to be overcome, that they have to think about or have to test against. That's what. Holy Jesus, dude!
I thought he went to bed. He's back. When he couldn't sleep, he decided he liked Dan enough, so he came back for more.
Oh my goodness!
Wow! Thank you, Fruitzilla.
Man, another 10. Okay, well.
What's funny is all he's doing is decreasing his own chances at winning the giveaway. And all these people are on the subs list. I'm going to pull one off. He screwed himself out of some coffee, Fruit. I'm going to have to get you something special just for you, man. Because
hey, part of the reason why we're staying up so late for our show is that we are offering coffee now. So just go ahead and get a cup. Yeah. You'll be up the whole night with us. And, don't worry about work. We'll have you covered for that too,
So Fruitzilla, I'm going to send you my email address in chat, and I want you to and send me an email, and I'll send you out a couple books for free.
Ooh. Oh, that's awesome, Fruit.
Look at that.
We'll definitely make sure you get in contact with him so you get those. Because I'll tell you what, I'm just going to show it here because I have it here. I know you have one in front of you too there, but this book is for real.
That's
like it is
on there too.
It is a serious book, and it is high quality. Like I know you talk a lot about the quality of your book. Maybe we can switch from systems, just talking about the quality of your products and how you go about putting these things together. Because these are seriously nice books, and I do truly.
You get good binding on there too.
Yeah, so I this story kind of starts back during the Kickstarter, and there's kind of a longer story there. I'll save all that. I'll kind of make it as short as possible. But one thing I wanted to do was Zweihander is I wanted collector's grade quality for every book that we make. I'm tired of my old D&D books falling apart. I'm tired of the crappy binding in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd Edition. I'm tired of softback books. Our expectation for RPG books, I mean, if you look at the older books in like the 90s in particular, they're pretty crappy. They don't hold up over time. And there are more materials and printers and way more than ever before at our fingertips, at our disposal as publishers, even the solo publishers. I mean, because when I first produced Zweihander, it was just me. I had raised, I think, I raised a $68,000 Kickstarter, another $120,000 on CrowdOx and BackerKit, and I knew that I wanted to make like something you could put on your coffee table and be like, "Holy shit, this thing is sturdy." I mean, not only does it weigh 4.5 pounds, it's 688 pages long, but it's sturdy. It holds up over time in gameplay. You can tote it wherever you can drop it on the floor. At Gen Con, I was literally this gentleman comes up and says, how do you hold 688 pages together? I'm like, let me show you. So I literally pick up the book like this, and I just tear it back and forth as best I can. And keep in mind, this is a book that I've been using around our game table for about 8 months. And I open this every Wednesday, and it's really sturdy because it's Smythe binding. It's got reinforced plank, thick, nice pages, thick paper, soft touch rubber matting on the outside. Like it's built for durability. Because I am, although I have an RPG collection, every book in my collection I open, I read, I don't use, but I don't just let things sit on my shelf. And I feel that if you're going to have a big, thick, sturdy book, you need to have stronger materials. And that is one of my major quibbles with a lot of other publishers. And I won't name them by name, but their books are not built to last. And that's frustrating as an RPG collector. Yeah. And I know that's where I can distinguish, or we can distinguish, I should say, Zweihander and Mongosh and other games in line to be different. As an example, you open the book to the first page or the last page, it's going to lay flat, no matter what. Like RPG books don't lay flat. We build books.
I didn't realize I needed that until you just said it, but that is a big deal.
Yeah. Print-on-demand books don't do it. A lot of mainstream RPGs don't lay flat. Dungeons and Dragons books now in 5th edition do. They were designed for lay flat binding. Other publishers don't, which is a shame. I know Free League, their books are lay flat. They basically made that change themselves. But lay flat's important. Having reinforced binding is important. Having beautiful colored end sheets and ribbons to mark your place is important. And having sturdy paper that's matte coated. For anyone who's out there who wants to produce their own RPG, matte coat your paper so you don't get that weird reflection from overhead.
Oh yeah.
Fluorescence on your paper. But even though we are only using 2-color black and white and sepia, we use high resolution images. They're all hand drawn by the same artist. We really lean into the production quality of the book, and I think that kind of stems back from my history as a painter, as an oil painter, nice. As an artist many years ago. I was really always intrigued by how paint is made, how the canvas is stretched, how you basically the make of art as opposed to the art itself. And I think that from an RPG perspective, that's what really compels me about the make and quality and structure of RPGs, and thus why Zweihander is so incredibly sturdy, not only just because it's a big book and it needs it, but also because I believe that that's how all books should be made. Because it's not that expensive. but it's probably a big damn dirty secret. But the reality is that producing RPG books, your costs are primarily artwork. Your second is layout. Your third is writing. Your fourth is editing. And the book quality material is somewhere in the middle there. But the reality is that you can produce really nice quality books without spending a lot of money on production if you have the right connections, if you're working with the right printers. As an example, my first print of Zweihander, I worked with Larry Elmore's printer here in Kansas City, Missouri.
Nice.
And he also works with the artist Plug, if you're familiar with his stuff from the Marvel comics. But they always touted, like, when I didn't know shit about shit, I was just like, like some dumb who made an RPG. They're like, hey, you should consider like leaning into quality. I'm like, well, let me show you some books that are high quality in my mind. They're like, well, that's not high enough quality. Let me show you what we can do. And since then, they kind of turned me toward this idea of having high production quality books. And although I'm sure at some point we'll move to color, because there's books that we got kind of in our pipeline that will certainly be in color, we will always maintain that high quality grade production. And that's something that isn't necessarily I do as myself as a creator for as long as I had been, but now that I am an associate of the publisher Angels Camille Universal, that's something that they take a lot of pride in on all of their books they produce and all their calendars and everything that they make. It's all high quality standard. That's something that we will always carry forward with RPGs.
Nice. I kind of wondered when just kind of looking at some of the art that I had seen, I was wondering initially if that was a stylistic choice to go with black and white or these grayscale concepts as opposed to the full color. But it sounds like it's not, but maybe it is. I think that gives a different feel to the game. The art obviously informs the reader on how the game feels, in a qualitative way.
Yeah, it was a deliberate choice. I love high glossy books, but Zweihander was not meant to be a high glossy book. I don't think it would work in a full color medium. It wouldn't confer the same tone, and that tone isn't dark fantasy. It isn't really low fantasy either. It's kind of what we called grim perilous roleplay. And we knew that there are some stylistic choices we wanted to make, meaning we didn't want to have any sort of digitized artwork. Although we have certainly manipulated some images in Photoshop, everything has been done by hand. And in fact, every piece of artwork in both Zweihander and Mongosh is done by the same artist, Dejan Mandic out of Serbia.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool idea too, just keeping that consistency.
Right. You see an image and you can tell it immediately belongs in Zweihander. Like you can just see it and you're like, yeah, that's a Zweihander image. Like you can just tell, like if they appear anywhere else. Like
now, obviously, there are other artists that have to get involved once volume increases enough. But it is cool when you're at a stage where you can keep a consistency and keep just a vitality to your art style.
Yeah, it's a deliberate choice. We want that experience to feel the same across Zweihander. And then when you open up Mongosh, which is the 368 page expansion, we wanted it to feel consistent. And not, I wouldn't call it the same, but you can certainly see an improvement in the artwork over time because he's been illustrating for us for almost 7 years. But nice. We really wanted to keep that consistency in design and creative direction. And we'll probably do that for future work as well. We're actually talking to Dan now about doing all of our illustrations for Colonial Gothic. And then Tetsubo, we're going to turn over to another artist who actually is doing our layout right now, Ken Duquette.
Cool.
So, I like the idea of, and we'll see if it's sustainable. But to having one artist do everything end to end, cover to cover, and producing enough artwork, by the way, that it feels like it's not an empty book.
Right. Yeah.
I think Zweihander has it's 688 pages and it has around 375 individual images.
Jesus.
It is a lot.
That boy's been busy.
I mean, there's not a lot of negative space on this pages. If there's negative space big enough, there's an image in there. Like it's all filled in.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah. I think that it's a good thing and it's a bad thing, right? Because I think that we should look backwards in retrospect and realize that there are ways we can improve things. As an example, the original Zweihander print was strictly black and white, no CPS. So people complain that, particularly with accessibility challenges, they're like, I've a color deficiency. It's hard for me to read. Not only that, and myself as partially dyslexic, had difficulty reading the words. So I'm like, okay, let's change the kerning in the font. Let's use sepia to offset. Let's add some padding between columns. Let's expand the size of the font. Let's use a different font. Let's use things that are that kind of reach toward better accessibility challenges that people have with RPGs, while still maintaining the inherent design concept that was already there. And when we released the revised edition, it addressed a lot of those things. And even now, we're like, okay, what can we plus up from the revised edition, which we're taking forward in our player's handbook in December? Like, we made more changes because we know it's kind of a living, breathing thing. In the same way that Dungeons and Dragons has done very well. They've done really good with their design consistency and growth. Their 5th edition layout is beautiful. They've got a very, their vision is fantastic. And we've established a similar tone, I guess you could say, in the way that we do our layout, the way that we do our artwork, the way that what font choices we make now. But yeah, I think really more so than anything else, we that quality of product is important, and not just to fill it with a bunch of mismatched images, because then you're into problems with like erratic creative direction. And the thing that comes to me immediately is 4th edition D&D. Like the DMG as an example is it's a good example of a really terrible artistic design. Although the player's handbook is very concise. It feels very coherent end to end. Your artwork clearly was informed by creative briefs that were sent to the artists. They weren't done in a vacuum. But you get to the DMG and the monster manual, and the quality's all over the place. And I know that Mike Merles and team made a informed choice whenever they started developing 5th edition to have a very different tone and approach in the artwork, but also consistency in the way that the books were laid out, the way that artwork was done, the way that columns lay, where the indentations are. It's very consistent. It's not erratic like it used to be, and they produce beautiful books now, which I'm constantly in awe and jealous of, because I would love to be able to create a standard that's similar to that, different in its own unique ways. For Zweihander, obviously being quote low fantasy as opposed to high fantasy, but to be able to create a different approach that is flexible. We carry some of that forward right now already in our Grim and Perilous library on Drive-Thru-RPG, which is our community content portal. But there's always room for improvement. And I think if we're not looking backwards at the things that we've done historically and, biting the bullet and saying, well, we need to change this for future work. You're not doing the end user, you're doing them an injustice by not addressing that.
Well, and you're also doing yourself an injustice. You should always be growing and learning and stuff. And it's interesting looking at this. I think as consumers of a product, this goes not unnoticed. Obviously, you realize that there's some quality there that's really working for you. But the nuts and bolts of it, knowing that these were deliberate decisions to pad out a column a certain way or to put parentheses in a certain way, all this stuff is phenomenal work, and it comes from a science. It's built up over time. I mean, there's an art to it, obviously, but there are things to be learned and a skill set to be developed. And, it's really fascinating to hear about that, because it does make a big difference, in how dense a book feels when you're reading it. Like, if I look at some of my computer science books, the material's dense as is, but the way they're laid out can sometimes make it completely unusable, And then if you get in other books, they're laid out in different ways to present information in a way that flows more naturally. And, it's super appreciated.
Yeah, I think that that's a good call out. I feel it's one thing that is important about RPG design, and not every indie publisher or creator has that skill or opportunity or the time or the wherewithal to do it. And I would say in particular with the OSR, there's some really great OSR products, old school. If you're familiar with OSR, I'm sure you are, but the old school role-playing games, some have very consistent vision. Some have inconsistent vision. Lamentations of the Flame Princess comes to mind, ignoring all the weird drama with that. But I want to talk about the actual construction of their books. They're highly erratic. They don't really have a consistent tone and style because that's kind of what they're reaching toward. They want to show it's kind of like hip and cool and punk and awesome because it feels like a zine. But at the end of the day, it's not a consistent design layout decision that they make. All their books are different, and it can be good and it can be bad. I would say, and it's not to pick on them by any means. I'm sure they're getting picked on plenty in the public already. But from a layout perspective, they're inconsistent. But now if you look at, say, I don't know, Kill 1 Billion Demons, and you look at those games, those have very consistent approaches in the way they create their layout. They're very user friendly. I dare say that it's almost mobile UX based in the sense that it's built almost for like if you were to put that book on a phone, like it would be like a beautiful experience to have. But nonetheless, like that aside, I think that you have to make those choices, not only just as a writer, as a game designer, you need to make those conscious choices to produce the best in what you can deliver for the format in which it's delivered in. And as an example, like Zweihander, this is like it's good. It's not great. There's always room for improvement. Like you said, we should always be growing. And our PDFs that exist right now are literally an export out from the book. Like it's a direct export, which is great on desktop, great on laptop, but it's really crappy on phones. Like using a PDF on a phone that's a table-intensive game is, well, it's the poops. It's the worst.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's something that's interesting. Nowadays, these are considerations we have to have. In the 80s, we obviously didn't have any of these options. So it was put out a book and you're good to go. So, I mean, are you designing things specifically for these different platforms, or are these kind of more afterthoughts? Are they... like how much of a market are you seeing there? Is that like an important slice of the pie, or is it just kind of an extra?
Well, that's a great question. And to kind of like walk through that there, and this is really so more about an observation about just RPG audiences. The reality is that RPGs have grown immensely. I mean, we know this already. There's a Wendy's RPG. Coincidentally, which is made by people I used to work alongside at the agency just down the road. It's so weird.
That's hilarious.
And somehow drama central this week.
Yeah. But my point is that their audiences are growing, they're changing, they're evolving, as is their needs. So Dungeons and Dragons reports, and this is a true number, 67% of their player base, in the United States are Gen Z. Gen Z has grown up on mobile phones. So most websites that are smart website designers develop mobile first. I mean, they don't just develop for the desktop; they develop for the phone, develop for that experience. So,
67%, man,
yeah, that's huge. So they're and a lot of them are women, which is awesome for our industry.
It's fantastic.
So there's this whole new audience of people coming into RPGs, and their expectations for the way they read and consume media is different than when we were basically fucking around with like DCC, and you drop a pencil in the crack between the pages and you can't read words. Like that's unacceptable. It's not only unacceptable from a younger generation's perspective, but it should be unacceptable from our perspective as well. So it's on us to meet the audience's needs and to meet them with the best format we can produce on the platform that they are most accustomed to. So we will always produce physical books because physical books that's the heart and soul of RPGs. It's not going away.
Hopefully.
Our RPGs are huge. I mean, even though the entire gaming industry is about $2.1 billion according to ICV2 as of last year, 2018, it's showing to be larger this year. The largest growing sector of that is RPGs. And even though it is the bottom of the layer cake, so to speak, the top being dominated by clickable card games, the bottom by tabletop role-playing games. Tabletop role-playing games are around $264 million. And that's a growth of almost 27% higher than last year. So RPGs are growing. And the other curious thing, and this is, I'll get to my point, I swear, in just a moment.
Okay. But it's all interesting info, man.
Yeah. But the reality is that when these new audiences they came into D&D about 4 years ago. There's a life cycle, and Wizards of the Coast knows this by heart, and they know this because Hasbro is a giant marketing machine that owns Wizards. They know the lifespan of an edition is about 6 to 7 years. And if you watch anecdotally on Twitter, as an example, if you're using sort of social media listening tools, which is like super marketing intensive stuff, not to get too far off tangent, but what you're seeing is people are looking for other RPGs. There's a reason why Critical Role ran Call of Cthulhu. There's a reason why Critical Role is running Deadlands for 4 episodes. There's a reason why they're running things that are not D&D, because they are now looking beyond Dungeons and Dragons for other games. So,
it sounds like your audio is cut out there. We'll try that again.
Are looking for other RPGs.
There you are, you're back.
They're looking for other RPGs beyond Dungeons and Dragons, and can produce. And if you can produce for one and meet them where the audience is at, and with a high quality format they're accustomed to in D&D, then you will win them as a customer, as part of your loyal audience. So one thing we're doing with Zweihander, we're actually about to announce on Wednesday, we're recreating our digital PDFs from the ground up. In fact, we're releasing on Drive-Thru-RPG exclusively what's called the phone PDF. And essentially what it does is it emulates an online mobile-first website style approach to PDFs that puts navigation at the bottom and the right-hand side to where it's completely searchable. It's optimized for tablets and phones. And it's gonna revolutionize the way that we consume digital PDFs today, because the traditional way, once again, is InDesign that resembles. So,
just to cut you off for a second there, this was a piece of information he snuck in on us earlier, and he said he wasn't going to sneak it out for you guys. So we got him, guys. We got him.
We got a scoop here on the wisdom check on this Monday. So
in the replay, there will be a big sign pointing it in there.
I was unsure if I was going to mention it, but it feels like the appropriate place because we're talking about we're talking about like formats. So what we're going to do is we're going to release that phone PDF of Zweihander, one of the largest RPGs in the market, in a very simple, digestible format and phone PDF format. We're going to release it for 3 days for free on Drive-Thru-RPG starting Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. Central. So if anyone is interested in picking up a phone PDF, Zweihander will be completely free, and it'll be packaged with the traditional layout one as well from InDesign, so that you can get a taste for both traditional Zweihander layout and new Zweihander layout. And we'll carry that standard forward with every book we produce from here on out. The next is Mongosh, which will be ready in November, our phone PDF for that. And then in December, we'll have Player's Handbook. Now, granted, those won't be free, but like a good drug dealer, the first hit is free. So,
well, what can you tell us about your product that's coming up here? That Mangosh, what is that?
Mangosh is out. It's actually been up.
It is, but I don't know about it. So
no, I just got corrected. It ain't coming up. It's out. You can get it right now.
Inform those who don't know.
So Mongosh is, or Mangosh, however you want to pronounce it.
Mangosh.
Never. I will say this: never worry about how you mispronounce the titles, because mispronunciation is now on brand.
Nice.
We made that decision a long time ago.
Mangochi.
Mangochi. That's right.
Zweihander. It's a Zweihander game, right?
Zweihander.
old
in Missouri. Yeah, that's right. Because our rules developer Adam, he speaks German. He's like Zweihander, and I'm like, no, it's Zweihander. And he's like, and then I think Mike said, he says, just call it Zweihander, and I'm like, let's just call it whatever we want because now it's off. It's totally on brand to mispronounce. So,
so good.
Main Gucci, or Mongosh if you're in Canada, or Main Gouch if you're me, is an expansion to Zweihander. Basically everything I couldn't fit in the main book, plus some really cool kind of chaos magic stuff, including a new bolt-on system called Vehicle Combat that plugs directly into standard combat. So now you can use like war machines, carriages, coaches, horses, rumble butlers, basically horseless carriages and other things in combat seamlessly using the same action point based economy. So you can fight not only vehicle against a vehicle. By the way, D&D, I did it first before Descent into Avernus.
You glossed over this, but you just said Rumble Bumble?
The Rumble Butler.
Rumble Butler. You just dropped that in there and just went right past it like we weren't supposed to notice that was an interesting word.
I mean, there's a profession in there that is effectively a football player. I mean, it's
that's right. It's super tongue in cheek. That's kind of another thing that's on brand for Zweihander and Mongosh is that dark fantasy has a tendency to take itself too seriously, and granted, we take ourselves seriously. We talk about really tough ethical subjects in the book, and we're very inclusive. In our artwork, in the way that we write, we use singular they them their, plural form, all good stuff. So, but the bottom line is that Zweihander and Mongosh, he's gallows humor. So, like Dustin had mentioned, there's a football player you can play in Mongosh because it harkens back to Blood Bowl. But we're very I'm a child of pop culture, so a lot of my writing kind of comes out that way. So it's not to be taken too seriously, and there's a lot of in jokes and dorky kind of geeky jokes buried in the work too that really take some. It's a lot of Easter eggs, I guess you could say. But Mongosh, it's more stuff. It's more professions, more weapons, more armor, alchemy system. And there's at one point we were thinking about actually doing another bestiary on top of that, to create another bestiary for the game master, because Zweihander already includes 120 creatures. Because 120 isn't enough. And we're like, you know what? Fuck it, we're not going to do another bestiary. Instead, we're going to teach game masters how to create their own stuff. So in Mongosh, we have a full-on kind of approach for game masters to create their own NPCs, to create their own monsters bespoke from the ground up, and really to kind of equip and players with the tools to create their own things. So I think is important to mention about Mongosh as well is that, and this is really another design principle, is that a book that is designed strictly for a game master or a DM is worthless, because you're only approaching one. You've only got one market you're approaching. If you're selling only to game masters, you're missing out around the 4 to 6 other people around the table. Yep. If you're selling only to players, the game master may pick it up, but probably other players will pick it up and they'll probably want to use it. And the game master will be like, "No, don't use that. It's the complete Rangers kit from D&D Second Edition." But we wanted to create. Mongosh is used for players. It's used for game masters. It has a fully baked 28-page adventure in the back. Every book we produce will always have an adventure in it, because why make new content if you don't have the opportunity to flex that content in a system, in a game? So we've got that built in there too. So Mongosh kind of takes a lot of the stuff that I couldn't cram into a 688-page book because my editor would have murdered me. Yeah. He's like, take all this shit out. He literally, like Matthew Peak was like, you got to remove some stuff. This is too big. So Mongosh was kind of the leftover stuff. Plus, it was a lot of the stuff we really wanted to touch on for other types of magic, new types of professions, and just more stuff, but without getting splat booking, meaning it still adheres to the bounded accuracy model. It feels like a natural step within the Zweihander line. It doesn't break any math. It doesn't overpower anything that's in Zweihander. It doesn't break the rules. It gels really well with Zweihander. And that's what Mongosh essentially is. And it's out. It just came out, I think, three weeks ago, I want to say.
Just a couple of weeks ago, yeah.
That's awesome.
It's been
I like that approach to having a story in the back of each one, because it's one thing to get a book, and now they're starting to do things like, what is role playing? What are you actually doing around the table? And that's good for people who are coming into the game. But I feel like there's that other component of, what is this game supposed to do? Like, what is it supposed to look like in context? Like, what is a story in Zweihander supposed to be like? Obviously every table's got their own thing. They're going to put their own spin on it and uniqueness. But having that baseline, a pre-scripted kind of plot out there, be like, oh, okay, I get a feel for this now. Now I can make my own stories. I like that. I don't know that that's really happening as much, because you always have to buy something separate, to get that experience. And if it's baked in there right there with like the core book, everyone's got that.
That's right. It's a show, don't tell. Like, don't tell me how it's supposed to work. Show me how it works so that I can. It's like that whole old adage, like, you can either give me a fish or you can teach me to become a fisherman, or fisher person. And I'd rather teach people to fish. To me, that's the better way to approach this, is to show people how to create their own things, and how to, as an example, in manga shows you how to craft conspiracies. Oh my gosh, Fruitzilla is like,
he found more people he hadn't already gifted subs to. Apparently,
are there
anyone else must have rolled the channel? He found more people, so he's.
I don't even see how you're finding these folks, man.
No, it's like, does he have some sort of a thing that lets him know when a new challenger has entered the arena? Like, every time, like, some
grief. Like, I need to figure this out, because I'm curious who's watching us, and apparently Fruit knows them all.
I have a theory that Fruitzilla is somebody's kid, and their dad's going to be super pissed tomorrow.
They would have already been pissed months ago if that's the case. This is.
Oh wow.
Thank you, Fruit.
Yeah, thank you.
That is so awesome. Seriously, Fruitzilla, thank you so much. That's very kind of you.
We're going to figure out that he's like one of these billionaires, is just like moonlighting as some like action hero somewhere, and like comes in, just reigns.
It's official. I'm already booking the November episodes of Wisdom Check, and I'm getting hold of Fruit. We're having him on here. That's all there is to it. I think we have to get Fruit on here.
Who is this mystery person?
We have the mystery person behind them. Yeah. Oh man, sorry, we didn't mean to cut you off there, but we did want to thank Fruit again, because it came raining in some more subs there, so we felt obligated. So.
That's great.
Oh, Fruit. So we were getting there in the main gauche, and we were kind of going over how in Zweihander you do have the player rules, you do have the GM rules in there, the bestiary, and then an adventure in the back. And you did the same thing then with main gauche. Right. So you're talking about a player's handbook though coming out later this year. That's probably not going to have the GM stuff then in it so much, right? This is going to be more of a pure player handbook then, or is that just kind of a name you're throwing out there for it, but it's going to end up kind of being like the other books?
Yeah, that's so we got some feedback. We poll our player base a lot. In fact, I've been running kind of demographically targeted polls among people who've been playing Zweihander or bought Zweihander on ttrpg for probably about 3 or 4 years since I started publishing, just so I can kind of get a feel, not necessarily for all the chatter and noise out there in forums, but to get a very concerted understanding of some of the stuff that people like and they dislike about Zweihander. I mean, there's Zweihander's size, like I mentioned before, it's 4.5 pounds. It's love it or hate it. It has a player's handbook, game master guide, monster manual, and an adventure in it. 688 pages. It's hard to lug around, but you have everything in one book, and the book it's like $33 on Amazon right now, I think. So it's crazy price, even though the retail $65. So like it has everything there. But even then, like being a game master and saying like, okay, here we go, learn this book and let's make some characters is like, it's a big ask. It's a hard ask to like for a game master to say, okay, because the initial intimidation factor, and it is really like a first touch, like you're like, holy crap, this game is huge. How could we ever begin to unpack all this? I just want to play D&D, forget it. And even though Zweihander isn't a complicated game, you only need to know about like 8 pages of rules because it's a very simple game. It just has it's a book of options. We know that to get players engaged, for game masters to be able to say, I need to get my players engaged and have them create characters, we need to create something that's a little bit more slim for the table.
Right. Yeah.
So we took Zweihander, we carved it, we slashed it literally in half, where the game master and player section begins and ends. We took some game master options and moved them forward into the players section. We put in new ancestries. We put in some new artwork. We applied our lessons we learned from previous layouts and put it in the player's handbook. We put horizontal and vertical character sheets that are perforated in the back you can tear out in the back. We did a new cover. We did everything kind of end to end and decided to say, let's create something that's a little smaller and see if we can address this concern that game masters have. And the great thing is about this is that the player's handbook, even though it's not out until December, is actually currently outpacing sales on Mongosh, which is it's good news overall for the entire line. And Mongosh is selling really well, don't get me wrong, but Player's Handbook is exceeding that already, and it's not even out. So
that's awesome.
I'm pretty sure, this is purely based on Amazon pre-sales. I'm pretty sure we made the right decision there. And that may change how we address Zweihander in more consumable formats in the future. Like, as an example, if we decide to do a professions pamphlet of every profession across every book and every campaign and every adventure we release, it'd probably take a similar approach where it's like, here you go, here's something super concise that you can use. Not to say that we're going to do that, but
well, it could be an interesting concept.
The kind of idea you could do, because you're talking, was it like 72 or some professions in basic professions, not even the advanced ones, right? Just in Zweihander alone, that's huge.
Zweihander.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No worries. Zweihander has 72 regular professions, 48 what's wrong with me? Expert professions, right? Okay. And then Mongosh has 8, I think it's 27 new regular professions, and another 48.
Wow.
Expert professions. So there's a lot of options, because each profession does one unique thing and only they can do that one thing. So that may be a viable product over time to do a professions pamphlet. I think this player's handbook is an experiment to some degree to see if our read on the community is right. Because I do believe that polling your community is important, not just like asking web forms or asking in social, but asking people who are actively playing the game. And I think that you can use that market research to inform design. And this is, I think, probably the third and final most important design principle, which I feel strongly about, just because I was a marketer for many years, is to really understand what's working and what isn't working for your audience. And it's clear that Zweihander it's kind of cutesy because it's big and thick, and it's called Zweihander and requires 2 hands to lift, and you can literally use it for a doorstop, or you can do hammer curls with it, or whatever it may be. The bottom line is that we know that game masters are having some difficulty getting their players to play because they're intimidated by the size. So we're producing a smaller book that's, it's a little more colorful, meaning we're using purple end papers, which I'm super stoked about. We just really cool indigo blue along with the ribbon. This new piece of artwork by Juicy Alaharo, who also did the artwork for Zweihander. The new interior artwork also by Dan Manditch, a ton of new artwork. And the layout is better than Mongosh. So there's all these, here he goes again.
These are 5 subs for Jeff, who got him back into role playing. So,
well, it's 5 more people. Awesome. I hope you got some gaming groups that are really taking advantage of you, man. Just getting in there and just rocking it out.
Oh, yeah.
I'll tell you, as a brand new GM for Zweihander, this will be my first session I've run this Thursday for Terror and Treefell. The first thing I did was I went through there, and I thought that too. I was like, man, I got these 6 players. None of them own the book yet. I think some have bought PDFs, so I think some have bought the book since signing on for my game, because they're telling me things that they wouldn't know if they didn't have the book at this point. So clearly some of them have bought it. Yeah. And so I was looking at it, I was like, I want to make sure that they didn't feel compelled to have to buy it to be in my game at first, at least till they got a good taste of the game. And so that's why I started putting together those images. I was like, I need something I can easily put up on screen for them to see, just splat rules here and there on things they needed to know in order to get through certain situations. So I felt myself compelled to already kind of try to find ways to to limit the book down to just some bare bolts that a player might need just to get intro into the game, sort of. So it's interesting that you're heading down that path too, maybe in a published way, because I already felt that need to kind of make that happen, even though I absolutely love the way this book is put together. So
I appreciate that. Yeah. And thank you for saying that. I was really excited to see those images you produced, and I know they're going to be useful to people when they can use them themselves. I think, and that kind of,
it looked really good.
Yeah, and that, just out of curiosity, what platform are you running your game on? Is it Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds?
It's Roll20.
Love it. We're actually, and this is we'll here in like less than, I think, 30 days, we'll have a really cool, like, we already have a character sheet there. It's an official Roll20 character sheet.
I love and hate it both.
Yeah, it's going to change. I promise you, your next iteration, it's going to be a fully baked character creator. So it'll be similar to Charactermancer for D&D. So
That's cool.
You can create and build your characters in a modular way. Yeah, that seemed like a smart move, because I know that a lot of people who are playing Zweihander, we see more players on Roll20 than we do on Fantasy Grounds for Zweihander, simply because that's where the tools exist, and we're Roll20 spotlight partners, so we've gotten a lot of attention around that, which is good. But we'll have
congratulations on that, by the way.
Yeah,
thanks, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think we owe a lot of this to Matt, honestly. And I know Matt's in the chat. He's probably running the Grim Perilous Gaming chat right now, or he's listening in. Hey, Matt, what's up? But having been awarded that with Roll20, we knew that the right choice was, like, we need to reinvest some development dollars into growing that as a viable solution, because we know, in particular, now that we got, with Matt kind of growing the Grown Perilous Gaming channel and getting Twitch partner, like, we know that we're going to have a whole new player base who's coming in, and we talked about this before about, a whole new generation of gamers, Gen Z people who are moving beyond D&D. So we've got to be able to create something that they can use, and Roll20 is that platform, and it is the premier online platform, no matter what Fantasy Grounds and Astral Tabletop wants to tout. I think it's 3.4 million players worldwide as of 2018 is what Roll20 reported, which is,
it's pretty amazing.
Yes,
We lost you there for a second.
Yeah, the audio is clipped out.
Your audio cut again for a second there.
So one of the things I was thinking about earlier with that kind of approach you were having, I don't know how feasible this would be, but it would be interesting to have an a la carte model, for Gen Z. If we're looking at like streaming content for music as an example, obviously artists want to come together and say, this is my vision. This is, these songs go in this order. They're grouped together, all that stuff. But in reality, these days people are buying a song or like these 4 songs or whatever. I'm kind of curious if you had a gaming book that was sliced up in different sections and you said, okay, what things are people really interested in? Well, immediately, because you have feedback of sales. Which pieces do you maybe need to redevelop or maybe aren't necessary or whatever? Well, you could tell because you immediately have feedback for that section, right away.
Yeah, I can't answer that question directly right now, but I can tell you that those conversations have begun to crystallize in a very material way.
Where?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that'd be something for everyone to keep an eye out for then, I guess, in the future as things continue to move along over there at Grim and Perilous Studios. So
it's good to see great minds think alike, Yeah. I mean, it does seem like something for a digital distribution. I think that would make a lot of sense. It'd be simple, because streaming, that's the way it works. But I think it would be difficult to do in the way that you're doing these other books, obviously, unless you're doing like a, print by order kind of scenario. Because, I mean, how in the world would you predict sales on this?
There's and this is more kind of inside baseball discussion around publishing. And I will tell you, I'll be completely transparent. My experience in publishing before I joined Universal as their executive creative director of games, my experience in publishing was strictly through Kickstarter. It was from a very narrow worldview of what the RPG market was really like, but I knew enough to distinguish Zweihander from other games to make my approach different, to market it differently. Thus, that's why it's kind of led to over 100,000 copies worldwide at this point. I mean, it's phenomenal.
Awesome.
it's kind of beyond wildest expectation for book sales and PDF sales. But my perspective was very, very narrow. And now that I'm at Andrews Macmillan University, or AMU, to make things simple, at AMU, now we're at scale. We have business structure. There are deep relationships there with printers, with distributors, with other publishers. So it affords us the opportunity to approach things in a way that is not necessarily different, but at broader scale. So when and I think and most publishers can tell you this, traditional publishers, anytime they choose to publish a book, it's a gamble. You're making an educated guess on what's going to work and what's not going to work. And having been part of this acquisitions process with a traditional publisher now, it's very different than I thought it would be. Not in a bad way by any means, but it's intriguing to learn how that process works. I would say that in particular, AMU they're very unique in that they are the first traditional publisher to enter the RPG publishing world, meaning they spent 40 plus years publishing comics, syndicated comics, specifically Far Side, Boondocks, poetry, Rumi Kapoor, Katana Chetwin, cartoons, The Far Side, Dilbert, Foxtrot, doing syndicated comics. And they're the first traditional publisher to move into the RPG world. So they have they are uniquely positioned in that they have a background in publishing, unlike D&D, who started as a game design company that became a publisher. So they have a very different approach and perspective and business model that can be applied to RPGs that I think is really going to make AMU stand out. And although, Zweihander is our flagship game, there are many others that I can't talk about yet, but there are many other RPGs, a small handful, that we feel will probably continue to kind of make our mark. We think that Phone PDF, obviously, on Wednesday will be our kind of first, like, hey, we're here. And some other bigger titles, I wouldn't call them well-known IP, but some will be recognizable, some won't. Some of the people behind it will be certainly recognized.
Awesome.
Yeah, which we'll have some announcements around that, I think probably December-ish. But we'll have some interesting things we're going to bring out, because the publishing approach for AMU is very, very different than what, say, Modifius or Cubicle 7 or even Wizards of the Coast is doing, because, once again, AMU is a traditional publisher. They have a very different approach, a much more lean model to how they acquire new games, how they acquire new manuscripts, how they bring in new artists, new RPGs, new artwork, et cetera, et cetera. That's really going to change, I think, the way that we kind of view how RPG publishers can operate at a very different level, from a business perspective, at least. But yeah, super inside baseball stuff. Like, this is how the sausage is made.
It's really cool, though. It's I mean, because there's a lot that goes into these things. And for players, that may be wondering, oh God, why did this game company do this? Like, why can't they just come up with this product? I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. There's a lot of guessing. There's a lot of figuring things out along the way, and reactions. And the design cycle is just huge. It's so long for most cases. Like how many years did you spend developing Zweihander? Is that?
I think probably. I think it was 6 years. As I remember, I put pen to paper on Thanksgiving Day in Minnesota. Like, that's the day that I started. Because I remember I was bored at my in-laws' house. I was like, I think
quesadillas, time to write.
I'm in Minnetonka, Minnesota, and it's snowing like a mofo. And it's like, I'm stuck inside. I'm not going to watch TV. That sucks. I'm like, what can I do? I'm like, maybe I should write an RPG. And
wow.
And granted, the intention wasn't to publish the RPG. It was just literally make an RPG for our game table. I mean, Zweihander was never really intended to be published. It was not its intention at all at first. It was just basically make a game for my friends around the table. But it's weird to think about now in retrospect. But yeah, it's I think that the design cycle, if you will, the way we kind of look at how we produce RPGs is certainly intriguing. There isn't a lot of online chatter about it, and there's very different approaches. They're different. Some people are talking about it, but a lot of it's kind of like, it's the secret sauce and et cetera, et cetera. And the reality is most people who are producing RPGs are doing the same as everyone else because everybody's working for everyone else or has worked for everybody else at some point. RPG companies are in this constant state of construction, deconstruction, like fall apart, form a new company, get a new IP, have that IP for 3 years, falls apart, reform with your buddies, and it kind of, the cycle persists. I don't think that's sustainable. I don't know how long that cottage industry approach will last. And I think I say that, and it's not because I know RPGs backwards and forwards, because frankly, I'm still very new to the industry, but what I do know, and this is through my own experience, for many years, I spent 16 years in agency and advertising, and part of my role is business development and basically disentangling business systems from processes and platforms and redesigning for digital experience, for transformative business practices, and I've seen these same things happen at very different industries at larger scale and smaller scale, and I know that the current rate of which RPGs are kind of deconstructing and reconstructing, that the ones that will survive, and I say survive because tariffs are killing a lot of middle grade publishers, middle I say tier 2 publishers and tier 3 publishers in particular. So indie publishers, as an example. This idea of deconstruction and reconstruction around IP is a very, very dangerous business model, and it cannot sustain itself. But there are people out there who take advantage of it, for not in a malicious way, but people who do it in a smart way. A good example of that is Kenneth Haidt. First off, he's one of my favorite game designers of all time. 2, he loves whiskey, so he and I are like good butts because we can share whiskey and chit chat about RPGs, and he has decades of experience in this industry that I don't. And God love the man. He designs awesome games, and he knows what he's doing, and he hasn't hitched his horse to one publisher. Instead, he's saying, where can I best utilize my talents with a publisher? Because he kind of skirts around the idea of like having to be tied down to just one publisher, and it's a smart play. But that there are people out there like him, and there are publishers out there, I think, like I want AMU to be like, to where we can sustain ourselves over a long period of time from a publisher perspective in RPGs, because we will make strategic choices and not just accept every IP that lands in our lap.
Right. Yeah, it's such an interesting thing, because I mean, kind of looking at, like, I did a little bit of game design courses in college, for computer game design and stuff. And, a lot of the experts that came in, they're just like, yeah, whatever you write, don't worry about story or any of that stuff, because somebody's just going to buy your system and reskin it to whatever IP they own and, kick it out the door. I'm like, man, that sucks. There's so much inherent to systems. And like, you go back and you look at games and you're like, that's why it feels that way, that it's just an awkward combination of systems to the IP. Like, somebody just reskinned that bad boy. And that's got such a short lifespan, I would imagine. Yeah, when you have these IPs, it's a flash in the pan, and then it's just dried up, and you hope you can do something with it later.
That's right. That's right. And without naming names, obviously, I think we know that there are some popular RPGs out there that have some really not so nice systems. And there are many that have great systems, because Modiphius is an example, a shining example of like a really well-run, well-oiled machine. If only because they have an understanding from a business perspective, be outside of RPG publishing in particular, that they've applied and why they've been able to gobble up so much good IP, because they use the DD20 system as a platform, and they change it in unique ways for the themes or the stories that they're telling. Right. When I looked at Zweihander, when I kind of made the decision, and this is implicable to what Modiphius is doing, when I kind of made the decision to publish Zweihander, I didn't want it to be a flash in the pan. I wanted to be sustainable. I released it at a time that I was clearly taking advantage of a gap in the market. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 3rd Edition was not well received. Right. I knew I could capitalize on that, because I'm a dirty capitalist at heart. I love game design, but I like money.
That's how you get to make more games, man.
That's right. It is treat it like a business because it is a business, and I have a lot of heart and love for what I make and produce. But every RPG company is in it to sell books, so make no bones about it. And if you're not in the business of selling books, you're not going to be able to make a sustainable living in RPGs.
Right.
But that aside, the reality is that when I released Zweihander, it was meant to basically fill a gap in the market. And it succeeded beyond my wildest expectation. Beyond the initially $7,000 ask on Kickstarter, I turned to $68,000. In with the with $125,000 in post pledges. So numbers aside, I knew that I wanted to make something that is sustainable. And the way that you make something sustainable over time is you take the same approach that D&D did. And the way that D&D did is they said, okay, D&D is a platform. D&D is a thematic thing that is high fantasy, that has these races, these classes that we'll all know and understand. And then you can layer on IP on top of that. Mm-hmm. So they have done well in some cases and poorly in other cases. Planescape, fantastic, but it wouldn't make a lot of money for them. Right. Birthright, all these amazing settings, Al-Qadim, Forgotten Realms, Dragonlance, Eberron, like all these really cool systems. And they've taken a different approach to 5th edition because they knew that if they look backwards, we talked about earlier, like applying lessons you've learned historically. Mm-hmm. How do you create a sustainable model? And the answer is you make strategic choices on which IP you layer onto your system. And so when I thought about Zweihander as a lifelong product, and who knows how many years it has, I hope many years, but we must all re-edition eventually. But for now, the reality is that Zweihander is a game engine. It is the opposite of D&D in the sense that it is not high fantasy. It is low fantasy, for lack of a better term, a grim perilous system. But it is meant to be the same approach, meaning is a game's engine, and then you layer on IP or new stories or new themes or whatever it may be. So Colonial Gothic, supernatural horror that takes place during the Revolutionary War. One example of that. Tetsubo, how do you take Sengoku era Japan with a supernatural bend and layer it onto the game mechanics? Like those things, that's the intention. It's the intention of D&D. It's the intention of Modivius's 2D20 system. And it's the intention of Zweihander. Zweihander, powered by Zweihander in this case, is a game engine, much like how Powered by the Apocalypse or Forged in the Dark is. And those are all great, fantastic games that have taken a very logical, smart business first approach to making an RPG sustainable in a market where we're already being flooded with hundreds of games a month that drop on Drive-Thru RPG from independent creators, from larger creators, and some are a flash in the pan, some really take off, some last for about half a year, others are never seen, these indie darlings that go unnoticed because the creator doesn't understand how to market. Like there are all these beautiful systems out there. In my mind, like to do this right, to create an RPG business that will sustain itself, you have to create platforms first, and then you focus on IP because IP becomes force multipliers for the platform. Right. A good example of that is, I think someone mentioned Arthouse Lauren. It's a good question. Good point. Interlock system. Witcher is a well-known IP. Cyberpunk, I think, uses the interlock system too, if I'm not mistaken. But the reality is that they've made very specific IP choices to layer onto their systems, and it becomes a force multiplier for other games. Because if you like The Witcher, you're probably going to like Cyberpunk Red. You're probably going to like every other game they produce because it will feel similar to the other games. It'll feel familiar, so you're not moving outside your comfort zone. You're not having to relearn new systems from the ground up. And the long and short of it, I guess, is that's how you build a sustainable RPG model. You create an engine and you stick with it. Don't manage 5 engines. Manage one. Do one really well. And focus as opposed to developing new games and new engines. Focus on landing IP, landing interesting stories, landing interesting campaigns, bring in really cool storylines, and layering on top of that engine to create a sustainable model. And I think D&D is the shining example of that, how they have turned 4th edition, which did well for them, how they've turned 5th edition into just this massive moneymaker. And
for sure.
They'll real edition probably in 2 to 3 years, would be my guess. But for now, they're making really smart, savvy business choices, and they'll continue to do so because once again, they've got Hasbro's, 6+ decades of toy marketing that are backing up all of their decisions, from re-editioning to IP to how they sell, where they sell, how they distribute, who they target, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, it was just really smart play to focus on bringing in new players. I mean, got very used to people like us who were like, hey, we've been playing for 30 years. I want more of the same. You don't give me all the the on-ramping stuff. Let me just skip to the stuff I want. I know what role-playing games are. So like that was a good move. Now, I'm curious about one other thing I meant to bring up, like, I don't know, 30 minutes ago or so. But we were talking about kind of the timing you were talking about, taking advantage of a lapse in a genre. Now, do you find yourself targeting a genre, that like a niche that exists, or do you find yourself creating content and then finding your audience that appeals to? Like, which of those models are you following?
We're still I feel it's still kind of filling that need in the market. It's hard. The challenging part here is that it's hard not to compare Zweihander to other RPGs, and it's not to say that Zweihander is doing it right. It's simply stating that Zweihander is doing it differently than other RPGs, for good or for ill, because we know there's a gap in the market. We know that there really is no go-to dark fantasy RPG that is world agnostic, but what I mean by that is that there is no dark fantasy RPG out there, save for Zweihander, that says there's implied themes, like in D&D's high fantasy, Zweihander's low fantasy. D&D is high magic, Zweihander is low magic. D&D is fantastical races, Zweihander is humanocentric. So you could take D&D and turn it into what you want for high fantasy, and you can take Zweihander and do what you want for low fantasy. So you have this. You don't have the baggage of having to strip away a game world to make Zweihander work. So to really address the question more distinctly, though, like, there's a gap there. That gap still exists. Warhammer does Warhammer really well, and I'll say this at the end of my days, that Warhammer 4th edition is probably the best edition of that game that's ever come out of the Warhammer line. It's fantastic. It's great. It does precisely what it says in the box. It does the old world well. And granted, people are still using Zweihander for the old world, and that's fantastic. But honestly, 4th edition is the best game to play for the old world. Zweihander is good if you want to make your own stuff. In the same way that D&D is really good if you want to make your own high fantasy stuff. If you want to play The Witcher and strip out the Witcher world from the Artel's lore and system, well, you're not really taking advantage of the strengths of the game. Right. In the same sense, like, if you're playing Warhammer and stripping out the old world and using just the game mechanics, you're not really doing yourself a favor. In my mind, Zweihander is trying to fill the same gap that D&D and Pathfinder does, meaning you don't have to carry along all of the baggage of a built-in game world. You're given the tools to create your own. And I feel that both older gamers and younger gamers that resonates with. We're seeing a very distinct shift in our demographics of players. It used to be mostly men above the age of 42 when we looked at demographic profiles. They've kind of switched in the last 9 months, where we're seeing more women playing Zweihander now, and our demographic shifting to younger. And that's through several smart, savvy marketing plays that we've engaged in that I can't go into. It's all secret sauce. But the reality is our demographics are shifting. And we know that we are fulfilling a niche or a gap still in the market. That isn't necessarily what Warhammer was intended to fill, or was Zweihander was intended to fill in Warhammer's gap between 3rd and 4th edition. But we're filling a gap in the market where D&D players are graduating beyond high fantasy and saying, I want a system that's different than D&D, that that still has some of the same trappings, the same sort of RPG-ish tropes in it, but I want to play my own Game of Thrones world, as an example. So they're not going to go out and rush out and buy Game of Thrones because they want to make their own Game of Thrones like world. I want to play Witcher like world, but I don't want to play the Witcher world itself. I think that there's an audience out there for that. There clearly is, based on Zweihander's sales, there clearly is, in that we're trying to meet that need. So it's my educated opinion. I could be wrong. I don't know everything, obviously, but I understand marketing, I understand audience, and I think that with this specific question, that I feel about 90% on this. I feel about that we're still targeting a need, a gap in the market, and there are a lot of gaps that still have yet to be filled by their RPGs. And there's a lot of RPGs out there that do really good things. And I really hope there's a couple that are really on my radar that I would love to acquire over time. But
we're going to sneak in here real quick because Dustin's picking up a question from Chad.
I do. We have a question coming in from the chat here from Shadzar.
Cool.
He feels a little poked a bit with his beloved D&D here that you claim that it can't really be used in a low fantasy way. So do you want to go ahead and just kind of, why do you feel like D&D doesn't work so well for low fantasy? Because you could strip away some of the magic classes. I mean, there's a lot of them, but
So if we talk about 5th edition D&D, which is probably the most relevant edition to talk about, I'm assuming he's talking about 5th edition, he or she rather. I apologize, Shadzar. 5th edition D&D at the end of the day relies on clerical magic to heal wounds. That's not low fantasy. That's high fantasy. There are bolt. Yeah, there are. Go
ahead. Sorry.
Cool. There are bolt-on systems within the DMG that allow you to make your game more gritty, but they break the math. They break the 5th edition model. The D&D is not designed for that. It's just the simple truth. It's not designed for that. It doesn't necessarily mean it can't be made to work that way, but it takes a lot of hand wringing and kind of like we'll ignore this rule just because we have to, because we want to make it work for our low fantasy or low magic approach. And it can work phenomenally well for some people who don't want an elegant rules experience. But I speak from experience, my own experience, and my experience isn't the same as everybody else's. That it's not inherently built for low magic. It just isn't. And even older editions in D&D aren't either. I started with a D&D 1 for the chat audience. I started with AD&D, 1st edition, 2nd edition, 3rd edition, 4th edition. I played Dungeons and Dragons Classic. I played Redbox. That was my background. That doesn't necessarily mean that it can't work for people. It's just my experience. And this is why people are like, oh, he's hating on D&D. But the reality is, if I pivoted my camera around, you would see a collection of no less than 37 D&D books on my shelf. Why? Because I love D&D. But I also dislike parts about it, and that's what drove me to design Zweihander. It's a love-hate relationship, and I have a similar relationship with Zweihander. There are things that I love about it, there are things that I wish were different. But
it's true of any system, I think.
Well,
absolutely, yeah. I mean, anyone who's not. No system is perfect. And that's the reality, is like no system is perfect for anyone's situation. And this is where we kind of started out, where we talked about why Game Masters house rule. They house rule because they dislike something about the system. For me, I house ruled D&D because I didn't like the high magic approach. And eventually it just got tiresome. And I knew I needed to design my own thing to do what I wanted it to do. And Zweihander won't be perfect for everybody. D&D is not perfect for everybody. Believe it or not, D&D can't do every type of genre. It just can't. It doesn't work that way. It's not how the rules elegance is designed. It's not the way the mathematical model works. It's not the way the abilities work. It is built for a style of game. And it can be changed a tick here and there, left or right. But to say that now D&D is low fantasy and it's low magic and that's just the way D&D is that's not observing the actual intention of D&D. That is not the intended approach for D&D. It's not the intended rules approach. And this is, like I said, I'm going to get real super wax poetic here for a second. But Mike Merles and Jeremy Crawford and every other person in Wizards of the Coast offices will tell you the exact same thing. D&D is built, D&D 5th edition is built for the most common denominator in role-playing games. Not to imply that they're stupid or anything like that, but the reality is that the middle ground for RPGs is where people play. That's where I started, where everybody starts to play. I still play 5th edition D&D. I mean, seriously, it's not like I hate D&D, but the reality is that it's designed for the most common denominator. Which is high fantasy. It's the most common form of fantasy we understand, and it is the way that the rules are intended. Right. So if you change the way the rules are intended, they're not really playing D&D at that point. You're playing your own thing. And I hope that people, when they look at Zweihander or they look at D&D and say, like, I want it to work a little different, I hope that they take that opportunity to make their own thing. I hope people take Zweihander and say, I fucking hate this game. I want to redesign it from the ground up and they make their own thing. Because that's the beautiful thing about game design is that it is a weird industry, right? Every game is some strange iteration of something else. And it always starts out as from a game master or DM saying, I want to house rule this and make it work differently. And that's how new games are designed. That's how game design works. You start out as a game master, you're like, I want to make something different. Boom. You make something cool. It's like, maybe you can publish it. Maybe you can't. Some people do. Some people don't. The barrier to entry is really, really low now to publish your own thing through Drive-thru-RPG and crowdfunding and Kickstarter and everything else. So
which is nice.
I mean, it's nice in that way. My longest running game of D&D, and I still play this game. So I mentioned before, I'm 42. I play twice a year in a game that's been running since I was 12. I have the same character. He's a half-elf, 12th level mage, 8th level fighter. He lost levels because he got level drained a couple Christmases ago. And we still play ADD for the first edition, which I absolutely love. And I love it because it fulfills what I want as a player, not as a game master, but what I want as a player, it fulfills that need. But as a game master, I don't want to run D&D. I want to run something different, and that's why how Zweihander was born. Because I wanted something different to run around my own game table. But when I play RPGs, I like beer and pretzel games as a player. When I run games, very different story. I'm a heavy narrative, heavy role play. Like game master, storytelling. All the good stuff. But as a player, like I love beer and pretzel games, and D&D appeals to me in that way. And I love it as a player. It's just fun to roll a bunch of dice sometimes. That's what I want.
Different moods. You can. Well, I won't say no, but most players have different tastes at different times. Maybe they're in the mood for high fantasy. Maybe they're in the mood for low fantasy. Maybe they're in the mood for beer and pretzels. Maybe they want something high entry. And that shifts around. It changes and all that kind of stuff. And you were talking earlier about, D&D not being a universal system, and that's definitely the case. I mean, really, we had GURPS was like really the only truly generic, try to do everything kind of game. And it was good, but it wasn't particularly specialized well enough to make any one subgenre really pop, And I think Specialist allows you to get in and really inform your system in a way that really focuses and supports gameplay concepts, creates structures around which a story can hang.
Right.
And so, I can definitely make a low fantasy game out of 5th edition or 4E or whatever, but there are certain concepts like hit points, for example, and we don't really have time to get super deep into this, but if you have hit points in 50 to 100 hit points, and a sword does 7, a great sword, you're going to have a different game experience. It's going to look more like your superhero kind of slugfest, and if that's the game you're going for, awesome. Good for you. You're Rock'em Sock'em Robots time. Let's do this. But if you're trying to play a low fantasy gritty thing, that doesn't make sense, And like you were saying, if you have magical healing available, that changes the way you approach combat. If I know that you lop my arm off and stab me through, and in 5 minutes I'll be fine, I'm going to have a very different attitude towards fighting than I would in a low fantasy, low magic, greedy concept where there are health levels and things. And that's a very different game.
I mean, we talk about, like, even with 5th Ed, you now have the ability to heal up by taking a nap. I mean, I know that's one of Daniel's next goals is that, naps don't heal stab wounds, but they do in D&D 5th Ed. Right. You just lay down for an hour. You feeling a little better, aren't you, bud? Get back up. It's time to go on again. Like, it's hard it's hard to take those kind of systems and put that into a world. Be like, yeah, this is gritty, low fantasy, right? Like, just go sleep it off, Bob.
That's right. If anyone in chat or who's listening hasn't quite got the point that I love D&D, I love your relationship with it, you should definitely read my article on the Escapist magazine called "Naps Don't Heal Stab Wounds."
I did. I've already read it. It's fantastic.
It incensed a lot of people, but it comes from a place of deep love for the game. It comes from a place of admiration where D&D started, my own foundations of my own role play, the things that I love and hate about D&D, and why Zweihander kind of is what it is. And like I said, it's not a perfect system. No system is perfect, and it's not intended to be. It's a system that was designed for me and my players around the table. It just so happens that other people like it too, which is great. I mean, it's fantastic. It's weird at the end of the day. I think we were talking offline. It's weird to think that at the end of the day, we're just all kind of this version of cops and robbers. We're playing those really complex games of pretend.
Yeah.
And having the opportunity to monetize your hobby is super cool. It's such a experience. But nonetheless, like, I think to go back to, I think Tally Darkstar mentioned this in chat. Genesis is as well. Yeah, Genesis is a really light games and out of Star Wars, out of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 3rd Edition, the narrative dice system that kind of do any genre. I just bought that book not too long back, about 3 months ago, and I'm super intrigued by its approach. I think that Fantasy Flight's going to do something really interesting with it over time. I just don't know what that is yet.
Well, that's fantastic. So we've done a wonderful job of just filling out our 2-hour time slot here, and obviously having lots more to talk about. This has been a fantastic conversation. I've learned a lot, and it's really cool getting that behind the curtain look at some of this. Because obviously I've had some interest in game design. I think other people in our chat have as well. And being able to sit down with somebody who's gone through the whole process, seen all the moving parts, is really it's just wonderful. And I appreciate that. It's giving me a lot of insight.
I appreciate you let me on to the interview. I know that before it's like I start bagging on D&D, and it's like everyone's like, "Oh my God, he's like the worst person in the world." But it really does come from a place of love, because I love all RPGs. There are a few out there that I purposely avoid, like, I don't know, Fatal, and Varg Vikarn, and most of Lamentations of the Flame Princess. But there are a lot of great RPGs out there. And Zweihander is not the only dark fantasy game out there. I definitely encourage people who are listening or watching to let your hatred fuel a search for other RPGs beyond Zweihander. But if you are interested in checking out Zweihander,
let's plug it. Where can they find it?
It's everywhere. It's at Barnes and Noble. It's at Target. It's at Walmart. It's on Amazon. It's at Books A Million. It's in Indigo, Canada. It's in Simon & Schuster. It's in your favorite. Or it's everywhere.
Sometimes you find it in the wild at your game store. You never know. It's
that's right. I walked into Barnes and Noble. I'm like, oh shit, there's a game. That's my book. Oh my God, this is weird. But I think it's least expensive on Amazon right now. I think it's like $33 for the entire book. And I know Mongosh is out there now too, as well. And Player's Handbook will be out soon. So, but like I mentioned before, the phone PDF will go free on Drive-Thru RPG on Wednesday at 10 a.m. Standard Time? Or are we CDT or CST still?
We're still ST, I think, at this point.
I think it's still Standard Time, but I could be wrong.
I never remember.
Central Time.
Some point it changes.
Whatever the Central Time is,
magic
that's
happens.
the time.
My phone automatically updates. I just know it happens.
Right. But the phone PDF and the standard traditional PDF will be paired together for free starting on Wednesday on DriveThruRPG for 3 days. So if you're interested in checking it out before pulling a trigger on a book, free.
Free is a good price, folks. So I definitely go check it out. I'm going to check it out. I'm really interested in seeing how it plays this Thursday because obviously I missed that experience. So I'd like to see it in action, see what it does, and
I'm hoping I can do it justice.
I'm looking forward to it. I know Matt's hosting, I believe, that day for.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Dustin, tell us a little bit about that for people who are in the chat and where they can find it and what to expect there.
Well, you will find it right here on Tabletop to Keyboard. That's TT2KB. That'll be Thursday, 9 p.m. Central Time, whether that's, standard or daylight, whatever. 9 p.m. here is where you want to be to catch Terror in Treefell, which is going to be a game that we are using the Zweihander system for. I do have 6 players who will be here. They're all brand new to Zweihander, with the exception of one. Leopold the Justice played through Chateau with me when we did a play test for you a while back with Matt. He was there for that. So he's got a little experience now. He's played a game or two. So he's got a little under his belt, but everyone else is pretty much brand new to the system. So I'm going to run them through this homebrew adventure that I put together. It's not one of the adventures from the back of any of the books. So I don't want anyone coming in thinking this is something that Daniel or his crew wrote. It's not, it's mine. So you'll be able to find that here 9 p.m. Thursday if you want to see how Zweihander plays.
Dustin, are you going to release it on the Grim Perilous library after you run it?
I don't even know how to do those things yet, but if you want me to, I will.
Because what the Zweihander, one thing that I'm a big fan of is being able to, just like the DM's Guild, you can produce your own content and resell it. On DriveThruRPG, Zweihander has the same program through Grim Perilous Library. So at the point where you're ready, let's chat on Discord. We have a really large creator community there, like 900 people at this point that are actively creating adventures and scenarios and stories and rules for Zweihander and extensions in ways that I never even conceived of. So you got to make that thing, man.
This is it right now. It's in this form. It's not in a form I can just put up there real easily, but I promise you when I'm done, I will do like a redraft and I'll find a way to get it there for you one way or another.
That's awesome. Hey, man,
that'll be cool.
It's an opportunity to publish your own thing and make money doing it without having to design a whole system ground up. And hopefully maybe that leads to game design in the future for you or, for Jeff. Or I hope so. I hope everyone takes this opportunity to realize how easy it is to make RPGs, because it really is easy to make RPGs. It's a lot of hard work, don't get me wrong, but the barrier to entry is really low, and I encourage anyone who hates Zweihander as much as I hate D&D to go create their own stuff.
That's right.
And it will be, if Dustin wants me to, I should say, I will go ahead and edit up that session and we'll throw it up on our YouTube channel.
Sweet.
Where you can also find all of our past broadcasts of Tabletop to Keyboard. It's on the full spelled out Tabletop, the number 2 keyboard on YouTube, and you'll see all of our past episodes if you missed on them. And there's been a ton, so go ahead and check those out. And who do we have coming up for the next couple weeks here? We've got
next week is Cosmo Joe, I believe.
Oh, yeah, that's
if
right.
If you're not familiar with the artist from 6D6 Studios, he'll be here next week talking about RPEX. Or I don't know if they say RPEX or if it's RPEX. I don't know how he pronounces that or if that's an acronym exactly. But I believe it's a True Dungeon sort of thing he's putting together. That is basically to compete with True Dungeon, I believe. So he also does a lot of awesome spray paint art, a lot of other cool stuff that he does. But he'll be here next week. So Cosmo Joe, and then the week after that is hold on a second.
That would be Alexander Wrights.
Yes, that's correct. We have a writer who'll be on the week after that. So that'll be good times there.
And then we've got the Liching Hour following that. And then we're bringing on Found Familiar.
And that's when we will do our coffee giveaway. So
And there'll be plenty more where that came from. We're making more and more connections. Hopefully we keep those up. It's been fantastic meeting everybody as we kind of go and grow this community. So thank you once again for joining us today, Daniel. And we'll be going ahead and wrapping here, I think. So thanks everyone in the chat. Appreciate you all. Go check out his books and support your community.
And check out Grim and Perilous Gaming, where you'll find them playing Zweihander and other games.
Adios.